sorry guys, the 80th Congress. So Republicans take over from 47 to 49, both chambers of Congress. They're referred to as the 80th Congress, which they have somewhat significance. You might see them referred to on the EOC or the AP test, because I want to make sure you have the name. Anyway, now they have a majority. They're able to actually get a lot of things accomplished, and can even override Truman's vetoes if need be. So they're going to try to pass 2 tax cuts for upper-class Americans. Truman vetoes both those tax cuts. They won't get that passed. They'll get some other stuff passed over his veto, but they did try to pass 2 big tax cuts, especially for upper-class Americans, because they've been taxed so heavily during the Great Depression and World War II. They're trying to reduce a lot of that taxation from government. These are their 2 biggest legacies, or the two biggest successes. In 1951, this Congress was able to get the 22nd Amendment passed. So the Congress, the 80th Congress in the late 40s got this passed in Congress, but as you know from making amendments from previous, you have to get states to ratify it too. So 3/4 of the states had to say yes. So it didn't get ratified until 51, but they created the 22nd Amendment, which limits the president to 2 terms. So this is in direct response to FDR. They don't want any more FDR situations. So even though it was tradition of 2 terms going back to George Washington, they didn't like the idea of FDR serving that long. So Republicans said, all right, no more of that. Now, from now on, it's 2 terms max of 8 years. You can serve a maximum of 10 years if you were like a VP who took over, but like 10 years and that's it. So 2 terms, that's all you can get elected to, or 10 years total and that's it. So that's one of the legacies of this Congress. The bigger legacy of this Congress is the Taft-Hartley Act. So this is something you can also be tested on, called the Taft-Hartley Act, named after the 2 guys who helped make it. Taft, T-A-F-T, Hartley, H-A-R-T-L-E-Y. Taft-Hartley Act made in 1947. So this was passed over Truman's veto. So this is the big act passed over Truman's veto in 47. Truman and a lot of Democrats or liberals called this the slave labor bill because it rolled back some of those gains that workers and unions had gained during the New Deal and during the progressive era under FDR. So it rolls back some of those gains they had gotten at that point. One of the purposes of this was to check the growing power of unions. So it does 3 things, and you don't have to know the specifics of this that much. I'm just going to tell you them real fast, and that's it. So number 1, it outlawed closed shops, meaning like a closed shop means like you have to be in a certain union to join this factory or this place of work, and so it outlawed that behavior. Like you don't have to be in this certain union to join this shop. A second part of this act permitted states to pass the right to work laws outlawing the union shop. So this permitted states to pass a right to work law outlawing the union shop, requiring workers to join unions after they employed. So basically, union shops are like you were forced to at some point join a union, even if you got hired on as non-union, and they stopped that behavior too. The third thing it does, it outlaws secondary boycotts, meaning like if the railroad workers go on strike, steel workers can't go strike to support them. Like that stuff's illegal. So you can strike if you're trying to protest your own jobs pay, but you can't have supportive strikes from other factories or somewhere else. And there's a 4th thing I missed on here. The 4th is it also gives the president the power to enforce an 80-day, 80. It gives the power of the president to enforce an 80-day cooling off period before a strike can endanger national safety. So I don't think you have to know a lot of detail about this act. I've never seen anything like that, but just be aware that when Republicans get control, they're able to override Truman's veto and actually limit the power of unions and workers and kind of roll back some of those, like, from the Wagner Act or Fair Standards and Labor Act, because they had gotten so much power back during the New Deal. There's actually, and I don't know if you can see this or not, there's a picture here at a convention where it says, Mr. President vetoed the Hartley-Taft slave labor bill, which he did, but it got overridden anyway. So anyway. All right, last thing I want to talk about, I'm going to go to the next slide, is the election of 48. And then I'm going to stop there. So we're going to cover the election of 1948. That'll be the last thing I cover for notes today. Okay. Anyway, it doesn't look too good for Harry Truman in 1948. Truman was polling very low. All the stuff that happened to him, a lot of Republicans made him look weak. You had the Red Scare, which we haven't touched into yet. The Red Scare made him seem weak on communism. The Cold War, he was doing an okay job, but people thought he could do better, which we haven't gotten to that either. You had the strikes, you had the inflation, the recession issues. even though by 48 things were starting to get better, it just a lot of things didn't look good in Truman's favor. The Republicans were very confident in a victory that year. They just had to basically ride this out, and then Truman would get defeated. It became even more convincingly so because the Democratic Party splits 3 ways. So you're actually going to have 4 parties run this year in 1948 for the presidency. So most normal Democrats will support Harry Truman for the nomination. So Harry Truman gets his own nomination for the Democrats. But because of his nomination, it upset the 2 extremes of his party, the liberals and the conservatives. The liberals back up the previous vice president, Henry Wallace. So the liberals support a more liberal Democrat named Henry Wallace, who was vice president before Truman was. And so he's going to promote a much more progressive agenda. He makes the third incarnation of the Progressive Party. So we've seen it with Teddy Roosevelt and then Robert Lafayette. Now you have the third incarnation of the Progressive Party here in 1948. The conservative wing of this party, the Southerners, break off and make the States' Rights Party, more commonly called the Dixiecrats. So Dixiecrats, one word. So Dixiecrats will pick a governor from South Carolina, Strom Thurmond. And I have all the pictures up here. I don't know if you can tell or not, but Strom Thurmond's up here, Henry Wallace is up here, and that's the Republican guy up there. But the States' Rights Party, the Dixiecrats, they wanted small government, conservative government. Obviously, they were the reason why they broke off because they were against Truman's pro-civil rights stance, his desegregation policy. So Southerners broke off from his party because they didn't agree with his policies with civil rights and African Americans, and they also in general wanted to have smaller conservative government, which Truman wasn't doing. He was promoting more progressive programs, and so they break off. So you have the Democrats split 3 ways. It just seems highly unlikely that he has any chance of winning. So the Republicans renominate the same guy they ran against FDR in 44, Thomas Dewey. So Thomas Dewey, who was the New York governor, and I have him up here with the mustache. Thomas Dewey ran against FDR and lost, but now they run him in 48 thinking that he's a shoo-in. Basically, the way Thomas Dewey approaches this election is that he just runs and just doesn't do a whole lot, doesn't make a lot of controversial statements or speeches because he figures as long as he just rides this out and seems like he's a good guy and a good president or a good leader, then he'll get elected, as long as he doesn't say something to make people upset. So the Republicans don't do a whole lot to try to challenge Truman at all because they're like, all right, we got this, no worries here in general. So Truman decides not to take this line down. So Truman develops a strategy. The first thing is he's like, all right, I'm going to try to get Congress to pass a very liberal package, which I know they're not going to pass. They're the 80th Congress, super conservative, they're not going to do it. So he tries to pass a liberal package in Congress in 48. Of course, they say no, which is what he figured would happen. So now he can go out and campaign and call them the do-nothing Congress. He can go around and refer to them as a do-nothing Congress, a Congress who doesn't want to pass things that help the American people. He goes on a whistle-stop campaign where he decides to hop on a train, kind of Woodrow Wilson style, and just travel the country, going town to town, giving speech after speech after speech after speech, telling people why he should be president, promoting his ideas of how to make the country better with these progressive liberal agendas, blah, blah, blah. So he goes around, just campaigns very hard. Eventually, because of all these speeches, they call them the Give 'em Hell Harry speeches because he's given hell to the 80th Congress. So he travels and travels and travels. And so in one of the most stunning upsets in a presidential campaign history, Harry Truman wins the election. So in 1948, by a thin margin, but very surprisingly, Harry Truman does win the election. So you probably can't see this, but he ends up winning about 57% of the electoral vote and about 49% of the popular vote. The Republicans under Dewey got 45%, and those 2 other Democratic parties split the rest of the percentages. You can see here that all the blue areas, all the Democratic takings, the little orange areas down here in the South, those are the ones that voted Dixiecrat, and the red ones up north are the ones who voted Republican. So Truman beat the odds. Very famously in this election, newspapers were so confident that the Chicago Daily Tribune printed their paper early, and on the headline it said, Dewey defeats Truman. So they were so confident that it was going to happen, they'd already started running their papers off. And so here you see a picture of Harry Truman famously holding the paper later that day that showed it saying that Dewey defeats Truman. whenever it actually did not work that way out. So he was able to maintain that New Deal coalition that FDR put together. He had maintained the New Deal coalition that FDR put together. He had just lost a few Dixie states. But this is a great indicator of what's coming, like the fact that the South is getting less and less likely to vote Democrat because the Democratic Party is getting more liberal and the South's been conservative forever. And so the Dixiecrats is just an early inclination that the South's beginning to shift their allegiance. The Dixiecrats only run this one election, but you can see the South shifting at this point. So I have one more thing on the slide called the fair deal. This is like Truman's version of FDR's New Deal program. He tries it out in his second term, and as we're going to find out Tuesday, that it's not going to work out the way he wants it to. So we'll stop here at the fair deal. I'll pick up the rest on Tuesday, and we'll go from there. Don't forget to turn your DBQs in. If you didn't already turn it in today, turn it in tomorrow for reduced points, but make sure you turn it in as soon as you can, okay?